I don't know, is it, is that honorable or horrible to be the last session before the party or before the drinks and before you can go home? Especially with a topic which is rather controversial. Let me tell you how this whole thing started. Maybe let me try to explain you my architectural side of what I do in Redmond. In Microsoft, we don't have really the profession owners, like, for example, they have them in IBM, they have them in HP Services, and they even have them in Avanade. But the closest to that from a technical leadership perspective is happening in a norms organization. And in there, we have essentially for every engineering discipline, and including architecture is from that perspective treated as an engineering discipline, we have a person that is responsible to guide and to create a direction where that discipline, where that profession needs to be. For the architecture for Microsoft, this is, luckily or unluckily, my job. As part of that, I need to work with people across other big vendors like IBM, HP, Avanade, Dell, Intel, and so very much each and every of those global vendors has a similar type of the role or the team or something like that. Plus, I'm working extensively with the Open Group and people in there, not just for the certification and education, but also in a couple of other forums. And I'm working quite a lot with ISA, which stands for International Association of Software Architects. Looking historically, when I was still in New Zealand, I remember I went and very passionately passed the MCA, at that time it was still alive, Microsoft Certified Architect certification. And I saw that after I passed this, now everyone will know that I'm a great architect. Not just that nobody really knew what MCA is, but it was also, whatever you passed, you are still not a great architect to me. And then that whole kind of, we had lots and lots of work done on this, which now we have internal several trainings, several presentations. I also coach lots of our PDRMs, which stands for Professional Development Resource Managers, which is a fancy name for our people managers inside services that are responsible to recruit and then to kind of take care of our technical workforce, which includes architects. The core issue is that it's quite easy to find, recruit, and then nurture an engineer. It's very hard to recruit and nurture and develop an architect because just, what are all the reasons why is it so hard? And very much this is how this deck whole came together. Because it comes down to the whole fact when you talk to someone who either wants a job as an architect or claims is an architect or claims is doing an architecture. What do you need to look for? What do you need to ask? And irrelevant, is it a certification? Is it just an interview? Is it a job interview? Or is it just kind of a verifying that that guy will not mess up when the solution will be done? What are the things that you need to look into the person to say, well, I trust that this guy will do no harm? Let me start with that. What does it mean, no harm in architecture? There are two big issues. This is a big preamble I'm giving to you. This is the whole slide deck I delivered in India, because in India they have no clue, architect, whatever. Everyone is an architect for them. So the deck, as you will see, is mostly trying to explain what are the types of architects and what they should do. If you are an application architect, this is what you do. If you are an infrastructure architect, this is what you do. But before I come to that, New Zealand is mature enough market that actually you deserve much more than that. So let me rather spend most of the time discussing all of the other big issues than just going through the models and how do you catch the fake architect or not. Plus, please, there are enough of us here that would be great if that would turn into a forum. So one of the good traits of the architects that we found is that the architects always have their own opinion and they don't hold it back. Right? They viciously share it even when it's wrong. One of the things that Norm usually says about me is that I have my own opinion and I disagree with it all the time. We will come to the communication skills as well. But if there is anything in particular that you would like to know or share, you will get the deck. I will also tell you, there is a couple of materials that I can easily share with you. One of them is the dreaded book of questions, which I wrote in the last couple of years, which is essentially what are all of the various types of the questions that you could or should ask an architect, and it's very much leading into our CITA-P certification. CITA-P stands for Certified IT Architect Professional. Looking back from certification, just kind of to give you a little bit more of a background that I have a little bit of understanding what I'm talking about. In Open Group, I don't know if you're aware, both Open Group and ISA, International Association of Software Architects, they have both of them offer certification for architects. And these are the only two pillars that actually where certification kind of has some merit. If you're looking into the certification from Zachman or a certification from Holtzman from Enterprise Architecture Center of Excellence, they're all very skewed towards their method or their methodology or their framework. ISA and Open Group, on the higher level of certification, they're very agnostic to that. Let me first focus on Open Group, because probably you are puzzled. Open Group has two types of tests for architects. The bottom test, which is a paper-based test, and we all know paper-based tests you can always cram for and you can always fake. What they are testing on a paper-based test is your knowledge of their framework and their methods, which is called TOGAF, the Open Group Architecture Framework. And that paper-based test, it's worth the weight of the paper it's written on. So whenever someone comes to me and goes that they are TOGAF certified, sorry, but that really, in architecture world, that doesn't mean much. It almost means like, I understand the basic acronyms and terminology in a TOGAF, and I know that ADM stands for Architecture Delivery Methodology. Nice. That doesn't make you a good architect. Then both of those organizations, both Open Group and ISA, have a board-based certification. Open Group is the one which actually has several layers of it, and they call it the layer 1, level 1, level 2, level 3. I don't even remember what the level 1 is called. Level 2 is master, and level 3 is distinguished architect. Funnily enough, I passed the distinguished architect certification at the same time as inside Microsoft we tried to create that honorary title of distinguished architect. And we had a very funny bickering inside because, for example, our chief architect who wants to become a distinguished, and I said, but I am Open Group certified distinguished architect. So again, titling means nothing. What you really need to be aware of when you are talking to someone is several things. How much experience people have. And all of those certifications or interviews or whenever you try to assess the weight of an architect, probably the easiest way, what I teach our resource managers, you need to assess how many stars and how many scars these people have. So both their wins, but they need to have the equal amount of shameless, horrible mistakes, which they need to be able to openly talk about. So for example, the easiest way to spot a fake architect is to ask them, what is your worst disaster? And they go, I have none. Next. And literally, I saw people who, with a plain face, claim that they have 20 years of IT experience, not a single disaster in their career, which is simply not true. And I hope that you are all aware of that. Disasters are still in IT industry as frequent as the successes, especially in architecture. But coming back, why did I ramble that way? It's the problem with the bad architects is that the bad work of the architect does not show on a day one. When you have a bad engineer or a bad coder, you just see the next morning that something wasn't installed correctly, or that something wasn't coded correctly, because it does not work. For the architect, seeing a bad architecture, you don't see it on the day of a delivery. When do you see that system is insecure? You see it after you are hacked, which is probably a year later. How do you see that the system doesn't scale? When you want to scale, which is not on a day one. When do you see that the system is not resilient, that the system can't be made, for example, translated to other languages and so on and so on? So most of the quality attributes, which all of the architects should really be the custodians of, they show way too late. Essentially, the solution starts to fall apart and crumble to ashes when everything is already paid off and team left, and you don't even remember anymore who was that moron that recommended that you hard couple of systems together. It just, you know, because everyone is in such a in a recovery mode to fix it that nobody thinks that essentially it was some idiot's problem that the whole thing happened. So this was the whole aspect, how we started to look into a very consistent model, how to test the architect. But here are a couple of other additional problems. First one is there is no one architect. In IT industry, we already have several types of architects. And it's not just IT industry. If you're looking even in civil engineering, even the person that is doing the interior design essentially goes through the architecture school. It's interior designer architect. And then the other extreme, you have a city planner who is an architect. Can you imagine a party of architects and those two people talk to each other with drinks? And the first one goes, I put those new curtains in and the light comes in so soft and just right and makes you so relaxed in a room. And the other guy goes, where is that room again? Because that part of the city we are leveling down and we are putting a stadium there. Right? The debate does not translate. And same happens when you take the application architect and ask that person to talk to the the enterprise architect. Because the application level architect, the coder type of the architect will go, that guy is in a cloud. He talks about the governance and doing the business alignment. He never even saw a proper code inside. Of course he didn't. And what do you think that the enterprise architect thinks about that little guy? Goes, that guy is just coding, has no clue, never saw the big picture. So from that perspective, let me very quickly, this one, try to drive you through. So there are 6 big personas in architecture. And each and every one needs to have a very distinctive qualities and skills and abilities in order to claim that that's a good architect or not a good architect. And starting from application architect, which is very closely related, essentially application architects are the most evolved or developed coders. And whenever I go to India and somebody tells to me, oh, I want to become an architect, they all assume that this is it. Application architect is the highest form of coder. Right, the evolution. When the 6th finger grows out, you become the, you type faster, you still understand all of it. You become a master coder, and you are, you will see the different titles, either a software architect or technology architect or something like that. It's extremely important, don't get me wrong, it's extremely important role and function, which has a very narrow but very deep scope to be able to properly engineer and design together. So this is the only role which has the engineering and designing very, very tightly coupled. And whenever I interview someone, is that person good or bad for being application architect or software architect or something like that, you need to throw both types of the questions in, which are very engineering type of questions. So for example, how do you do multiple inheritance in a C#? And you should see those architects, especially in India, looking. How many of you know C#? How do you do multiple inheritance in C#? You don't. Can you imagine how hard it is to say that sentence to someone who is interviewing you and obviously knows so much more than you? So the whole idea in the communication protocol, which I call, this is the HOS, Human Operating System. You need to be able as an architect not just be the smartest kid in a room. If you don't communicate that smartness eloquently enough, you are just the smartest kid in the room, nothing else, because nothing will really ooze out from you. On the other extreme, you have people who have extreme emotional intelligence and are capable of building extreme levels of trust. And usually I will find them as a bad enterprise architects who will really schmooze around and will paint wonderful cloudy pictures. And then customers will say, okay, I'm sold, let's go, let's do it. Goes, oops, I'll call somebody else, right? Then suddenly a brain also needs to walk in. One of the key attributes I want to ask, whenever you talk to, always observe both intelligence and ability to communicate. One without the other is still very good, but does not make a good architect. Good architect can have a brilliant idea, but without communicating it extensively, that idea will never properly be seeded either in a customer or the other architect, or seeded in engineering or development. You notice that I mentioned those three dimensions. Architects need to speak 3 languages, and I always test for all 3 languages, depending on which category, which type of the architect that is. First language is language of business. Actually, business to technology transformation language. Are you able to talk in business terms and explain why technology is relevant? So BTS, as we call it, business to technology strategy. This is the only way that an architect is capable to talk to business sponsors, is able to do conceptual designs. Conceptual designing and conceptual pictures are pictures meant for people with money. That's the easiest way to teach architects what conceptual design is. Whenever I see a conceptual design that says B-stock on it, that's not conceptual design, because nobody with money knows what B-stock is. Sorry, they don't. So conceptual pictures need to tell me this is a very scary secretary, and this is the user interface she types to, and that goes to some big machine at the back. That's conceptual picture. It's almost on the level of, the earth is round, and sun comes up on the east. But these are the concepts you as an architect need to be able, not talking down to someone who is a moron, but is able to, in a very simple terminology, explain to business audiences. And you will frequently hear either in the interviews, whoever goes through that school of ours, which we now created together with Open Group and ISA, and then inside that you have a Dell, Intel, HP, IBM. Couple of organizations, we are starting to form together. My book of questions is now initial basis of it. What are the basic things that you should hear in the interviews? And one of the things to test for a good architect would be, talk to me as I'm a CFO, or talk to me as I am some other executive function. So the first part is talking to business audiences. The second very important language that I expect architects to talk is talking to other architects. What is the language that other architects understand is mostly logical abstraction, not specifics and not the fluff concepts. Logical abstraction. What do you want to do on a logical level? It's almost like, tell me with Lego bricks, what do you want to do? Don't go too granular, because I don't care that the Lego brick is made of a plastic of a certain ratio of various materials. I really don't care. And I also don't care how many kids will play with it and how wonderful that will be 2 years from now. Just tell me how it works. What are the compositions of that? And all of the logical designs, logical schemas, and all of the logical composition should be created that architects, those different groups, are able to talk to each other. And that's where all the frameworks come in, all the standard nominations. So for example, either asking you, are you capable of drawing UML? Are you capable of drawing Archimate? If not, how do you draw your architectures? And don't get me wrong, it's okay to have your own drawings. But I will usually ask you, how much time do you spend to explain what you draw to another architect? And it's fine if that picture is some new domain-specific language that you invented for your own purposes. But you need to be able to defend it. You need to be able to explain why that one is better than why didn't you use something that most of the other architects use. And the third language is language of engineers, where every architect, and I can't emphasize that enough, every architect, including enterprise architects, every architect needs to be credible in front of the engineering workforce. If you don't show credibility, if they will just look at you and go, oh, a man in a suit, you know, external consultant who never actually put his fingers into a mud and saw things working? Pretty tough, because engineering workforce will make those things. If you ever built your own house, you probably saw that architects who draw the house also frequently walk around the construction site. That doesn't mean that they bang the nails in and stuff, but they are credible. They know how to talk to every single builder. If you don't have that skill, you are a bad architect. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to be able to do it. It doesn't mean that you have to be able to code, but you need to have enough of the insight, foresight, understanding of landscape, of technologies, of future, of all of that stuff, that not a single developer or engineer will say that you are fluff. It's not easy, it's tough, but that's how it is. So let me go a little bit into those details. First, we're talking about the, where are we? Forward, backwards, yeah. Mapping to the business types. If you're looking at the business types and then compare that to the architect, who is the executive type of the architect and talks to the executive layer of people would be those mostly, you know, starting from the enterprise and business architects. You can frequently see now, more and more I can see the title of the strategic architect. And I usually ask, what does that really mean? Is there also a tactical architect in your organization? But again, I want to leave you after this session with that impression that the title on a business card is not that much relevant, that we don't have any normal decomposition which title is exactly doing what. This is mostly what we are just finding out in the industry today. The second pillar, which is mostly talking, you know, within the product companies, the horizontal one, you know, seeing the chief and domain and CRM, ERP type of the architect. This is something that traditionally in the past, we kind of always rejected. And we said, you can't be just an ERP architect, because you need to understand more. You need to go deeper. We always preferred what we see in the third tier, the vertical type of the architects. And this is what you usually see in every big system integration house, that they create that verticalization of a different subdomains of the architecture. And then, of course, you go to the consulting, where you can see very much everything possible that every predicate and every suffix that you can attach to the word architect possible. The problem is that in a consulting business, personally, I think that none of them is actually primarily really an architect. All of them are really consultants. What's the big difference? Consultants will mold the skills and competencies exactly to the need of the current client. And if a client wants that they chop wood, they will chop wood. And if a client wants them to, you know, do the telepathic user interface, they will try to make a telepathic user interface and charge for it, of course. But the whole point of a consulting is that you are so flexible that you cannot truly put a person into a box and say, you are a developer, or you are an architect, or you are whatever. Because consultants have to be all of that. So in a consultant pillar, you can pick a title which a consultant will think that the client really needs most right now. Right? And either you stick with that title and look for the clients that need that title, or you change your title on a regular basis. So application architect, as I said, is the one who builds the house. When I was still in Eastern Europe going to university, my first attempt to finish university was in civil engineering. And at that time, I was dating an architect, a girl that went to the architecture academy. And those discussions between us were really bizarre, because for me, as a civil engineer, as a type of application architect, my perception of a building was that the building is just a pile of material in a certain order together, right? You have a ceiling made of concrete, you have a wall which is covered with wood, and then you have a window, and rah, 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 rah. And every architect goes, you're such an engineer. The house is a wrapper around the living space. It's that living space that matters, not the wrapper. So if we wouldn't use this empty living space in here, the wrapper of the whole convention center wouldn't be relevant. So who cares about the wrapper? We care that the ceiling is high, that the temperature is right, that the chairs are comfy. And that's where you see that you get that complete misunderstanding when you come to the building, back to the software. You can build software for functionality, which is given to you by a customer, or you can build software for structure, which is given to you by an engineer. Functionality is how do you use it? How do you feel with the software? One of the greatest application architecture proverbs, which I saw on one t-shirt in US, it says, it's not what software does, it's what user does. That's that application architecture approach. User or whoever uses your system, maybe the other interfaces and so on, that's what matters. Functionality matters versus engineering where structure matters. How you put it together, did you use Java or .NET? Is it having the SOAP or XML or whatever? These are structural questions. While functional questions is what actually you get out from it and how it works. So you can see that in architecture, so the whole design questions, even when you're looking into the floor plan, that's another interesting one, because usually architects in application space will tell me, oh, I do UML, I'm an architect. I'm going, even if you go to the construction business, who uses the floor plan, like the picture on the left? Oh, both, of course. Architect makes the floor plan, but then builder uses it to implement the house, right? So who can draw it? Can a builder draw it? Of course, builder can also draw the floor plan. So actually, the floor plan is the communication vehicle between both roles, right? Yes, but every role is looking at different things. When you take a UML diagram or a floor plan, an architect is looking at completely different things in the picture versus an engineer. An engineer looks at that and goes, ah, I see the wall. I can see how much is between two walls. I can see all of those engineering quality attributes of the house. What does the architect see? For example, architect will say, oh, look, the doors are opening inwards, the house. That's very bad, because if there is a fire inside and you want to escape, you come to the door which you need to open back into yourself. Isn't that horrible? You should open the door outwards, except it's external door and so on and so on. So for example, the architect will tell you when you go through the corridor full of offices, you should never have the outbound opening doors in the corridor full of offices. Because if there is a courier running down the corridor and someone opens the door, architect knows what happens. Engineer would never think about that dysfunctional element in the architecture. So same picture, same domain of problem space, engineer versus architect, totally different things. So usually what we will ask an architect, is it good or bad architect? You show them a typical UML diagram and say, is it a sequence diagram or something like that? What do you see? And you just look what kind of things, oh, this one is calling this one and you get the return call. So fine, you're a developer. Versus you need to find out what ticks a person most or first on all of those diagrams. So for the application architect, I'll not go that much into that. You will get all of those slides and you will see them in there much deeper. So the typical types of the architecture for application architects are very, very, very closely related to the software. On the other extreme, we are talking about the infrastructure architects, which are mostly if you're looking back into the building engineering, mostly concerned about that traditional infrastructure which we see, do you get the gas to the house? Does water flow? Is power readily available, and where do we bring it in, and so on and so on. So the infrastructure required that someone then puts something on top of it. There are a couple of issues with infrastructure the moment when you become an owner of it. And usually infrastructure architects have a feeling that they own it in a data center, right? Because once you have that ownership feeling, you become very, very protective of it. And you will get the certain resource or capacity or storage increase only after you jump certain hurdles, fill the certain forms, and so on. So, because the ITIL says so, or change management procedure says so. Finding a good architect versus a good operations engineer comes again into the question, do you understand why your infrastructure is needed? What will I do with this storage? Can you ask me the right questions to assess what kind of a compute workload do I need? If I need to have a document management, if someone comes to you and asks for both compute and storage to build a, let's say, SharePoint, what do you ask as an infrastructure architect? If you're an engineer, you will say, well, we have servers of this size, and we can give you that much storage. Is that okay? Versus an architect, an infrastructure architect, which should start asking a whole bunch of much more functional questions. Can we co-host you on another SQL server? Or do you need a unique instance? What's the reason for a unique one? Is there any requirement for a redundancy? Is there any of those additional dimensions that you need? Did I really burn already half an hour? Jesus. Okay, so let me really quickly go through. The next one then is a solution architect. A solution architect is kind of a, don't mix a solution architect with application architect. Application architect is the one who plays with sand and makes out from the very raw sand and water very unique structures, which are usually small, but very fine-grained and unique and have all the degrees of freedom. Solution architect is highly constrained and plays with Lego bricks. Solution architect doesn't have too much of the gluing freedom. They will take big components, which usually sit on top of the infrastructure, and try to make something new and functional out of it. So solution architect is much closer to the business than application architect is. Because solution architect is the one where, when looking at the triangle, all architects, we have our own triangle, SAF, right? Structure, appearance, functionality. So for solution architects, structure is way predefined compared to application architects. Application architects are capable to open Visual Studio and very much redo with their own team almost anything. You know, if you can dream it, you can make it. Solution architects already know that there's quite some things that are predefined. You can't just make your own, for example, identity. You can't just make your own authorization. You can't just, you know, do things on your own, which application architects really like to do. So essentially, solution architect becomes much more interop, integrative type of a person that is looking at other existing systems and finding the best way to implement new functionality. So all of the tests for the good solution architects are essentially tests how much innovation they can pour into some pre-existing limiting conditions. So you tell them certain limiting boundaries, or for example, that this is a financial industry, the solution architect immediately needs to be aware, regulation, this, that. So whatever the financial limitation the financial industry brings in, or maybe, I don't know, defense sector, or any kind of industry, telco industry. You can give them other limitations that you can say, for example, that you can't, for example, the technology is rather old, or technology can't go to the cloud, or this, it has to be hosted, it has to be here or there. And you always try to see how do they think through some scenario to put together a solution. On purpose, I'm not saying the word build, because solution architects are not great builders. They're very much just assemblers of different components to meet the new functionality. So solution architects are really excellent in very constrained environments, while application architects are really excellent in startups and building a new idea from a zero up. You'll get that from me as well later. And all. So, by the way, this is the picture you can see on top left, that little umbrella picture. This is what Dana Bredemeyer is preaching already for almost 7 years now. So it's talking about different architects have a different scope of interest. And that's what kind of separates us so dramatically. I already told you that anecdote from between the interior designer and a city planner, but essentially that's about the same. You need to have one type of architect that have the scope of concern is that complete big enterprise. What it does, why it does it, and how it does it. And then that is segmented into sub-scopes, either products or segments or domains or whatever, and you assign sub-architects to the sub-areas, sub-scopes, and so on. And essentially this compartmentalization works really, really well as long as those architects with the smaller scopes are aware that somebody else has a bigger scope above them. So very much comes back to that ability to work within the limits. It's almost like I have all the freedom unless this guy tells me I don't, right? I can do everything down here unless I get something up, down, from him on my head. And every architect needs to be aware of, and lots of the tests, either in a certification or interviewing, needs to look into that ability. If you are doing very authoritarian type of work, which is my way or highway, I will do it this direction, we will use these protocols, and we will take this product because it's the best, that's not the greatest persona for the architect. Every architect needs to be extremely flexible from perspective that you can drop your design very much on a dime and go with a slightly different idea, either because a new constraint came, something else changed. Essentially, we are working in extremely ambiguous environments. And lots of the interviews for architects are changing the requirements throughout the interviews rather rapidly, just to see, can you accommodate? You come halfway through and you create a brilliant picture, and suddenly someone says, oh, sorry, didn't I tell you that those 3 servers are actually at another service provider? There are so many firewalls in between. There's the internet in between here. And a whole design falls apart. The architect should say, yeah, sure, we'll redesign and put the boxes together in a very, very different way. And then we get to that big enterprise architects. The easiest way when I'm trying to explain to managers what enterprise architects really do, because they are not technical very much, they still need to have that credibility, but they are not technical really. What they are instead is, well, let me put it that way. Each one of us, especially if you are coming from a large family, the best enterprise architect you ever experienced was your mother, probably. The person that looks at all of the children that are fighting with each other, with all the partial motives, with all the complete, want this, not that, and, fighting with each other. The enterprise architect is the one that needs to be gentle enough, yet firm enough to instill order and sense of unified direction to all of those little diverse teams and directions and projects and systems and the whole chaos. How do you make that chaos that kind of doesn't really kill each other, and that the most of the energy inside of that enterprise is actually creatively used, not destructively abused with each other? That enterprise architecture teams will allow that the whole various, so let me be very specific. In US, I walked into a pretty large enterprise. I can't name which one it was. And very much within a couple of hours, talking to several teams, the IT department hated what the other team did separately, and they created a little pocket of IT over there and the servers that are not here. And those guys actually went and bought the Salesforce.com, not because the Salesforce is great, but because they don't have to use the IT department. Right? Literally, they bypass them. And that was the #1 reason to go with the Salesforce. And kind of you go on and on and on. And at the end, we had the meeting with enterprise architecture team and go, well, did you see how terrible we are? And my best friend, Uli Homan, our chief architect, said, yes, and you are the problem. It is your job to make all of that work, and you didn't do your job. And obviously, you all need to go on ice for a while. We need to find some either temporary or permanent new team to run enterprise architecture to bring all of that back together. You did poor governance. I mean, he didn't mince words. And those guys, especially their chief, later said, that was the most bitter medicine we ever got, but it was the right medicine. Enterprise architects are the only pivotal, they're a linchpin to bring all of those other things coherently together. If they don't do their job, then whenever you see the organization where business does not understand IT, it's the EA problem. Whenever you see they kind of try to create little pockets, or do we need to decompartmentalize, or should we just outsource? And all of those questions which are happening and should never happen if you would have a much greater strategic direction, understanding what are essential systems, what are the core systems, what are ancillary systems. You can easily spin those off. You have to keep those. These are the mission-critical stuff. You never touch the database because we have only one database, and stuff like that. That's enterprise architecture. Not, lots of other things come as well. So what you see in a TOGAF comes as well. What Zachman is doing and doing a decomposition framework. Yeah, these are all the tools that help. But the enterprise architecture mission is to run the proper governance and strategic guidance. That's all. And again, this is one of those jobs that if you do it poorly, you will see that poor results no earlier than a year later, probably. I already talked all about that. So a couple of models you can see from Zachman on the bottom left to the ADM, which is architecture delivery method on the bottom right. Terry can tell you massively about, we inside Microsoft, we have an effort right now to create our own methodology, which we call framework, not to confuse anyone, which is called the VRF, Value Realization Framework, which is a method, but we call it a framework still. But much more important for those couple of last minutes, let me just, oh yeah, that's the one I wanted. Let me jump through this. So these are a couple of semi-finished models I'm working with Len Feskens from Open Group and a couple of other people. Anyway, that should be better animated at first. Let me start that we have not just horizontally, imagine that you don't see the vertical brands. Just look at the one set of the boxes vertically, not three columns. We have all of those different roles of architects inside an organization. But the core issue is that those roles behave very differently depending, are you a software vendor, and that's the first pillar, because you create a software for unknown audiences. That's essentially a nightmare for architects. If you are making software for unknown audiences, then architect can't capture requirements because there is no one to capture them from. And that's the core, beginning of architecture. The A of architecture is gathering requirements and then through some cognitive process making an intelligent design. That's how architecture works. But if you can't capture requirements, you need to do it. How do you do it? You just make them up. So the whole architects in the first pillar have that very different type of work. So architects, no matter do they have a title or not, inside Microsoft product groups, have a very, very different mentality. So for example, the enterprise architect in Office has nothing in Microsoft Office team, has nothing in correlation with, for example, Terry as an enterprise architect in services. Because Microsoft Services, our consultants, we are that middle pillar. So is probably most of you if you work in any system integration or big IT company, where you get the software from the left pillar, from those guys. They create your core components, and then you package them together somehow into the solutions or whichever layer of architect you are, and then you throw them to poor customers on the right side. And then you have architects in the enterprise and a customer level where essentially the only mission of those architects is to not disturb the system, to keep things, to keep Jell-O not shaking. That's the easiest way to explain So if you go from the software vendor who is inventing something new out from nothing, and architects are helping that, to all the other extreme to keeping the lights up, and whenever you bring the new stuff in, it should not disrupt the existing IT environment, the architects are very, very different. And that's how we created that matrix of 5 by 3, which is a potential relations. So one of the things that what we are starting to realize is that, let's say myself, I'm an infrastructure architect by my background and by historically. My easiest way to talk to other architects is that 1 degree of separation. I can talk inside Microsoft. I can talk to a business architect, or I can talk down to a solutions architect, or I can talk to the similar type of the infrastructure architect, either if I go to the Microsoft Foundation Services, where our infrastructure architects sit inside our cloud division, or I can go to any of the enterprises and talk to the infrastructure architects there. Further apart I go, if I want to talk to the enterprise architect at the customer, so more degrees of separation I get, more complicated and codified language becomes. More important it is that we start to not just understand where I am, but also I understand where that partner I talk to is. So I saw never-ending amount. Did I put that on this slide? No, I didn't. I saw never-ending amount of discussions where a software-level architect comes. So inside Redmond, we usually don't see customers. We see them only under adult supervision, which is called Executive Briefing Center. So we have a very special building where customers come, and there's the whole protocol, how the presentations happen, one-on-one, and literally with cameras, adult supervision. Literally, it's almost like an institution. Not that institute, but institution. So I frequently go there and talk to the various types of architects and CTOs and so on. And more often than not, I walk into some room where some very stiff German high-level enterprise architects will sit in a room. And there will be a guy bearded in shorts and clogs trying to explain to them that how good it is to use the JSON to communicate to whatever. And those German guys are very polite and stiff, but you see that it's literally the guy on the bottom left of this picture trying to communicate to a guy on the top right of this picture. And there is absolutely no connection. Whose problem is it? Is it his problem or their problem? And personally, if you ask me, it's both sides. Because we as architects, the bad architects have so much of that self-pride. Oh, I'm an architect and I control and design and steer the boat, that we forget frequently that very frequently you need to get down and be humble and essentially start to understand people that you serve, either engineers or completely different architects, and have a very open way of listening. So again, coming to a couple of the, whoever will ask to get, I will give my book of questions. You already have it, don't you? My CTP assessment manual. So Terry will be the one that if you want it, ask him and he will send it to you. It's a little PDF file of 70 pages or so. Lots of questions in there are essentially addressing that. Are you capable of addressing that alien space of, let's say, if you are that type of architect and you get discussion with a terminology from a completely different domain space, how are you able to react? Oh, this one is not animated either. Okay. Let me try to quickly build that one for you as well. Traditionally, if you're looking how architectures were done, you need to look at the middle pillar. So you start with a technology strategy, which you kind of decompose into technology capabilities, and you get at the bottom some technology products out of it. And this is very much how historically we did architectures in the past. It was always very technology-centric. And just recently, not that far back, I would say 7, 8 years back, we started with a business strategy, you can see on the top left. So business strategy being somehow decomposed, and if you're on a Paolo session, you saw a couple of options to do the decomposition of a business strategy into business capabilities, and somehow you merge them together with those technology capabilities, and again, at the bottom, you get technology products. In order to see that an architect is properly complete, we started to add quite some of additional stuff. On top, you can see that we started to add the organization strategy. Your organization can have a strategy to grow, for example, by scope or grow by scale, or what is the strategy of your organization regarding the growth? You want to stay, let's say, New Zealand-only company, or do you have a big appetite to go international fast? These are all organizational strategies, which are linking to a completely different organizational capabilities, and at the bottom, we are talking about different organizational skills, which means, are you having mostly blue-collar workers or white-collar workers? Are you very top-heavy, big salaries, low retention, high churn? How do you want to treat your staff? I remember when, here in New Zealand, when I worked with at that time it was the largest outsourcer in New Zealand, with the 3 letters I'm not allowed to mention. And it was an interesting discussion because they were bleeding workforce very, very fast here in New Zealand and getting new consultants in. And I had a discussion with their local management here in Auckland. And I said, do you want that we do something that people don't go out kind of at the average, I think it was the 2 years was the average tenure of the consultant or engineer in that company? I said, no, because when people stay for too long with us, they want higher salary and become very cynical. We prefer to recycle fast, which is, at that time, yeah, I really laughed, but it is a totally valid and written down in several business books. It's a totally valid organizational strategy, which you need to adapt to as well. So why all of that complexity here? What we are going into is that a good architect should never be just technology-focused and should never be just business-focused. Very much we need to start bringing all of those things together. The only thing that we still are unknown with this model is that black maturity box. Why did I put the word maturity in it is, one thing I know about that blender of both business and technology and organizational capabilities, the maturities are probably relatively closely together. So you don't want to introduce highly mature technology for very immature business capability. It would be just stupid. So let me give you a specific example. Let me first talk about what the maturity means for a technology capability. A technology capability, for example, would be data synchronization, which every architect should be aware. You have 2 systems, and you want to synchronize the same piece of data needs to be on both sides. How do you do that? Well, historically, if you talk especially to typical IT people, it all depends what they really know. If they know the core operating system, they say, oh, FTP, awesome, or file transfer or something like that. You talk to the SQL guy, they will go, oh, no, it's a ETL, extract, transform, load, and you kind of use SQL Server to push the data around. How about if you talk to the BStock guy? How about if you talk to the SharePoint guy? How about if you talk to the Azure guy who is actually just read how Azure App Fabric works? Ooh, we could use App Fabric for data synchronization. You see where I'm going to? It's the same capability. So as an architect, you should not be technology specific. You should be that capability specific, and FTP is very low maturity, and App Fabric on Azure is very high maturity. Now, your question as an architect should be, what are you doing with that data? So, because if you are just pushing, I don't know, a record of your timesheets around, versus if you are putting a transaction on a SWIFT protocol for banks around, it's totally different business capability. It's totally different definition, and based on that, that blender of maturity needs to decide what do you pick and choose and get out at the bottom. So we are defining quite some of the criteria to help good architects to excel, to get the questions out from that. How do you define mature business capability, define mature organizational capability, and how do you merge them together? So essentially, I think that wasn't there one more model? Yeah, not relevant? No. I thought that I have one more model, but without it, let me just try to explain. What we are working on right now is, as you saw, you can be a good architect regardless what your title is, regardless of what your seniority is, and regardless very much of your experience. You can be either good or bad. The greatest mismatch and the greater misattribution happens when someone thinks that you are architect of one type, but you are something else. And a mismatch is then badly misaligned and is explained as a bad architect. You can still be good, but you are not good for what the request or requirement was. So instead of that, we are working on a model where instead of saying, I want a solution, a good solution architect, or I want a good enterprise architect, we want to start with actually quite big set of architectural capabilities. Design skills, governance skills, for example, security skills, project management skills, and so on and so on. Work with a recruiter or a client or whoever wants to assess, what do you want? And they will go tick, tick, not relevant, tick, 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 and so on. And then you say, based on how you filled the questionnaire, now I can tell you what you need. You need a mixture of, application architect with a governance from enterprise architecture, for example. And instead of having those bad definitions of roles in architecture, which then you kind of still toss a coin, are you getting someone or not, have a much better decomposition, which you can select, and based on that, every one of those is getting a set of questions, which is very much assessing a person on 3 possible levels. The highest level, you do have experience in this. Tell me about the project when you did the governance of your architectural discipline, or where you did the backwards traceability, if a complete traceability of a life cycle is a requirement, and so on. The second level is that you have a knowledge of it, which means you didn't get the chance to practice that specific capability, but you extensively understand and know how you would do it if you only would get a chance. You are kind of completely prepped and ready, theoretically ready to run if they just ask you to do, let's say, governance. And the third tier, which is awareness. Yeah, I heard about it. I know where to go to learn about it. I don't know about it much yet today, but I can learn. And of course, the fourth tier, the lowest tier, when you ask a person, what is ROI, return on investment, how is it calculated? And they go, oh, yep, level 0, essentially. So the whole idea is that we would be able to get a very quick, and you can go as detailed or as broad. On the top tier, there are 5 boxes. Business to technology strategy, design skills, understanding IT environment, having communication, human dynamics, interpersonal skills, and understanding the long-term quality attributes. 5 big buckets. Each one of them goes to about, I think that on a third tier total, we go over 100 total possible competencies. It's up to a recruiter, up to a person that wants to assess or design. And of course, certification wants to give you the most objective bar. Although I do hold all of the fancy titles, I have to honestly tell you today there is no certification that I would trust that someone comes to me and say, I'm that kind of a certified architect, that I will say, okay, I fully, completely, totally trust you today. Because certification is the lowest denominator. It's not the level of proficiency that you want in your specific case when you want to assess is someone in front of you a good architect or a bad architect. Or if you are, let me turn around, if you are an architect that is preparing to actually show how good you are when you want either a new job or a new engagement, or you actually want to impress the client that you can do the job. So it works on both sides of the equation. How are we doing? Are any questions? I'm yapping here. Was that horrible? Was that acceptable? Is it that late already? Hey, I woke up at 3 a.m. in Sydney this morning, not you. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, please, please. Oh, thank you. Yeah, my worst disaster actually happened in New Zealand, but I will avoid that one. I will talk about, and Paolo knows very well about that one, I will talk about the second horrible disaster which I was part of. It was not directly my fault, but objectively, I was part of the team that approved the horrible solution. Essentially, it was for a broker in US where we decided, came back, I don't know if you were in my previous session, we decided that the data can be far away from the compute instances. And literally that far away meant it was a New York City, it was the financial sector in East Coast, and not more than 3 months after the implementation of wonderful Microsoft solution, which went through all the highest levels of quality assurance and quality technical checks, which I was part of, someone cut the cable, the optical cable, which linked those two buildings. And essentially, I don't know if you read it at that time, but very much it caused that the whole financial market in US was down for 48 hours, more than 24 hours. And can't get worse than that. Can't get worse than that. When you get a call from a Building 34, when the Building 34 is where all of our top execs are, including Steve Ballmer and others, and you hope that you still have a job. It was pretty bad. Yes, please. Very good question. Do I put value on university degrees? Oddly enough, my father as a professor and I viciously disagree on exactly that topic, because my original stance was always that a good university should actually prepare you functionally for the job that you will get when you exit from the uni. While my father says that university needs to give you a better, broader horizon and perspective on the world. Of course, my father is a teacher of comparative literature, so it explains it, right? But I need to say that in the last 5 years, I'm starting to be much more inclined to his perception what academia gives you. It gives you breadth, and it gives you a much more holistic perspective on approaching problems. When I see someone who went through, let's say, a Unitech type of a degree, will have a very, fix it immediately type of the approach. Will very rarely try to see the broader consequences, impacts, trying to look historically. If we were going back to the architecture, if you didn't get the university degree with a little bit of a history, or maybe, let's say that ideally you have a degree in some art, not so much, bachelors of art, not bachelors of science. That means that you understand how classical architecture worked and what were the core principles in classicism, which means that everything needs to be in order, everything needs to be properly structured. Because if you do get that, and you look at the Hellenistic architecture, the proper Greek architecture, Roman architecture, and then you look into Zachman, you go, that's classicism. Only academia level of knowledge can give you that you look into all of that kind of a prettiness and fluffiness and beauty of the social networking architectures, and you go, that's absolutely clear Renaissance. It's back what we used to do already. You would never get that knowledge and understanding if you would not study that before. Do I think that university gives you great skills that you come out from uni and now you are a solution architect up and running? No, definitely not. It might come closer for engineering, but in architecture, they already say usually that you are not a good architect until you start getting a gray hair. You're just apprentice architect before that. And, I kind of smirked about it. When was the first time I passed MCA? Was 2003? I think it was 2003, and I go, I'm young, milk barely kind of dried off my chin. I'm going, I'm an architect. Looking back, I wasn't an architect. So you need to get experience. It's almost like asking you, can you learn piano by reading books, or riding a bike by reading books, or learning to ski? You need to fall so many times off the bike or off your skis on your butt before you actually master it. And I think that architecture is still half art, half science. You can get a good dosage of science. You will not get enough of the arty part in the uni. So great start, but not enough. All right, I'll still be around here. and if any other additional questions comes by. And it's awesome that you all stayed for so long for the last session of Tech Ed. Thank you.